Welcome to Modern Legacy, the podcast helping families preserve wealth across generations. I'm Tyler Resch, and in each episode, we unpack the strategies that help successful families turn wealth into lasting legacy. Today, we're diving into estate planning and a unique way to help multi-generational families get their financial matters in order.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Today we're talking about something that sits at the heart of every multi-generational family, and that is clarity. When families build wealth, the challenge isn't just about managing their investments, it's about managing the information, where everything lives, who knows what, and how the next generation carries it forward. At SteelPeak, we believe that real wealth management starts with organization, and that's why we've partnered with leafplanner, a platform designed to capture everything that matters before it's too late. Joining me today is Josh Kanter, founder of leafplanner, and Reza Zamani, founder and CEO of SteelPeak Wealth. Gentlemen, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Tyler.
Josh, let's start with you. You created leafplanner after experiencing firsthand how complex family organization can be. Tell us, what problem were you trying to solve that no one else was addressing?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So the origin story for leafplanner really goes back now almost 25 years. And that story, which you guys have heard, so I'll share it with your audience, right? My family, and this is really a personal family story. My dad growing up had been what I'd refer to as the world's most renowned tax lawyer of his era, represented almost anybody who was anybody of multi-generational wealth of that era. This is kind of going back to the 1960s, 70s, into the 1980s. And as part of that, it gave me sort of an insight, if you will, to what these multi-generational families of wealth were all about and how they were operating. Of course, I was a kid, so I don't want to overstate, how involved I was in that. My dad then got sick in 2000. We found out he had cancer and was going to pass away. And at that point, my dad and my brother and I were loosely working together. We were running a couple of venture capital funds. I was a corporate securities lawyer who was doing a lot of the work for our venture funds and our portfolio companies. My brother was working with my dad on the venture side at that point, and then my dad still had his own tax practice going on. So when we found out my dad was ill and going to pass away in 2000, the reality is nobody wants to think something's going to happen to them. And we thought my dad was going to be the quintessential patriarch who would die at his desk at 100 of a heart attack someday, and here we were losing him 30 years earlier than we thought we were going to. And so I left my legal practice, my private practice, to come work exclusively for my family and help navigate through what we knew would be the challenges. And I want to preface this in saying what leafplanner and you guys, as you're branding it for your use, the family map, which I love, by the way, is really about taming complexity. And we all have complexities. So the story I'm about to share with you, I hope it rhymes enough with people to give them a sense of it. I don't expect ever that anybody's going to have, God forbid, they have the same story that we had. So we were a pretty traditional 3-generation, 3-branch family. So we had all the family dynamics issues that come along with that. But we were filing, because of my dad's tax practice, we were filing 750 tax returns a year for our family alone. We had a complicated balance sheet because my dad had been doing deals with his clients and friends for 40 years, including the venture funds that we had started. We were in the middle of what would turn into a 33-year battle with the Internal Revenue Service that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we were surrounded by complexity, and nobody really had all the pieces. And so when you ask, Tyler, what's the problem that we were solving, the problem that I realized, and by the way, then I spent 18 months with my dad before he passed away. So I had this huge gift, obviously an emotional gift, but I had this huge gift of time to download from my dad everything I thought I needed to know, or he thought I needed to know. And what I realized at the end of that process was that here I am, I was a lawyer. I had taken my dad's estate planning class in law school, and I had 18 months with him. I would argue you don't get better prepared than I was. And yet I realized I'm in the dark. And if I'm in the dark, what does that say about my mother, my brother, my sister, my wife? I didn't have kids yet, but my kids, all these other people were way more in the dark than I was. So when you go back to that question of what was the problem we were trying to solve, is that then 25 years ago and now there is no system out there that comprehensively captures the context and the information and the interrelationship of information that sits within a complex family. And that can be everything from who do you trust? Why did you do these deals? What do you need to know about this art collection, this painting behind me, if people are watching this? All kinds of different things that I didn't know. And so when my dad died, everything from finding a safe deposit box receipt that had no date and no name to people coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, your dad promised me this, that, or the other. So again, it was all this context. By the way, I didn't know why we were filing 750 tax returns. All of a sudden, I'm trying to figure out, wait, why are we doing this? And I don't know. And the only guy who knew is now dead. It was really this kind of, as you described it, a holistic family map. It was for us, we called it the owner's manual for 20 years before we built Leaf Planner. So Leaf Planner was born out of that whole origin story and came to be 4 years ago to say, how do we help other families and other firms like SteelPeak provide this as a solution, as you said, as really an entry point to understanding the family and the multi-generational aspect of the family.
Yeah, it really does seem like that idea of turning, what otherwise is chaos into clarity really resonates with people. And again, they might not be as chaotic as the situation that you founded and built this solution on, but even a fraction of that chaos could create all sorts of disorganization until they start actually mapping it out. So Reza, when you looked at how SteelPeak serves families across different generations, what gap did you see that this partnership felt like an essential one to pursue?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. So, at SteelPeak, we've always focused on helping families make these smart, value-based decisions around their wealth. But what happened is over time, what we realized is that true multi-generational planning goes far beyond investment management or even portfolio design. And families today face a much more complex web of structures when you look at trusts, business entities, insurance, philanthropy, and multi generations that all have to play a key role in this. So what was missing was a way to bring it all together in one cohesive kind of living picture. So ultimately, when I saw what Josh and his team have built with Leaf Planner, it clicked immediately. They'd solve something that every family office and really every advisor struggles with, which is how to translate a family's complexity into clarity. So it bridges that gap, right, between strategy and structure. And it gives families and advisors a shared language, a visual, what I'll call blueprint for how all the pieces fit together, whether it's financial, legal, really emotional, and relational. So, this partnerships has allowed us to elevate the way we serve our clients. And ultimately, we're not just managing portfolios anymore, but rather we're helping families manage the architecture of their entire legacy.
Yeah, and it's not just technology for technology's sake. It's really helping be the glue that pulls all this together, keeps it all together. So Reza, maybe let's double click into that a little bit more. As we've heard, we refer to this as the holistic family map. What does that mean in practice? And more specifically, how is the firm using the tool when they're starting a new client relationship? Maybe we'll just walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. So again, the holistic family map is our way of bringing clarity to complexity. And when a family engages our family office division, we start by mapping everything that matters: their assets, entities, trusts, insurance, again, family members, advisors, even the relationships that influence financial or legacy decisions. But this isn't just a data gathering exercise, it's really more of a guided discovery process. So our advisors and our team within our family office division is using the map to really uncover what's most important to the family, where potential gaps exist and where communication might be breaking down. For instance, sometimes we'll discover that one generation doesn't fully understand the estate plan, or a key insurance policy hasn't even been reviewed in years. So by creating what I call a shared visual, we're giving the family a single source of truth. It helps everyone, parents, children, trustees, and advisors understand not just what the family owns, but again, why certain decisions have been made. And the holistic family map really transforms what can be an overwhelming process into something empowering and proactive. And it ultimately becomes the foundation for what I again call every strategic and emotional conversation that then follows.
Yeah, seeing it visually mapped, I'm sure families kind of see that connection and other connections that they've never seen before. They've never had these discussions. And when you put it in front of them as a map, as you described, it makes sense that they start thinking of the family dynamics in different ways. Josh, from your perspective, for people that are first hearing about Leaf Planner, how is it different from a document vault or a digital organizer, some of these other, technology? Again, those are kind of technology for technology's sake. Maybe you can unpack a little bit how the Leaf Planner solution is specifically different than what might be commercially available through a digital vault or an organizer.
Yeah. So I was smiling as Reza was saying, using some of the words that he was using, because I think he really captured it. First of all, it's very difficult to unfortunately see it through words. So as you guys are able to share it with your clients and prospects, hopefully they'll see it more visually. A digital vault or any of these kind of digital organizers, if you will, are really designed to house documents, and they're not really designed to actionalize those documents. They're not designed to educate about those documents. They're not designed to show the relationships, as you guys keep saying it, the map of how does this all fit together. So what's different here is that Leaf Planner, or the holistic family map in the SteelPeak vernacular, is going to show you all of those interrelationships. Those are interrelationships between things, as Reza said. That could be estate planning, that could be documents, items, right? That could be art collections, that could be mementos, it could be whatever it is, cars, homes, insurance policies. How do these things all interact? How do they fit together? Who are then the people who you have to layer into that and say, well, I've got a different insurance advisor for my homes and my cars, my property and casualty, than my fine arts collection, because that goes through a completely different analysis or whatever. There's the context to all these things that's almost never going to be, conceptually, you could capture that in a digital vault. Like you could write another memo or do a video and capture it in that digital vault. But the way Leaf Planner or the family map works in the SteelPeak instance is to say, how do I put that all together? How do I tell the story? Not just that here's a document that says Tyler is the trustee of my revocable trust. But why did I choose Tyler? What's my relationship and my history with Tyler? What else does Tyler touch in the Kanter family? And why is that important? And so I always jokingly say, whatever the opposite of peeling the onion is, it's building the onion back together, right? Is how do you visually tell that story? And so I think it really differs dramatically from, digital vaults are great. Everybody should have one. And the family map can be one. Leaf Planner can be one, or you can use another one. Actually, it's built very agnostically to where those documents live. Everybody should have that, right? I'm sure there's families in the Palisades who lost all their documents. So from that perspective, of course, everyone should have a digital vault. But this is really adding on top of that, again, kind of all of those relationships and all of that context. And that, frankly, is what typically, I would argue, gets families into trouble, right? It's not, can I find the operating agreement? It's, why was I in this deal with Reza? Do we have a buy-sell agreement between us? How is that going to be funded? When was the last time we looked at it? How does the insurance work that goes to the buy-sell agreement, right? All these different complexities that come up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that distinction. Everybody should have a document vault, but that's really just data management at its core. What you're talking about really takes us further out on the spectrum of, providing this holistic solution that's really around family governance at that point. So let's get a little more tangible. I know you touched on the Palisades and the tragic loss that people experienced there, and what an appropriate solution that the holistic family map and Leaf Planner would have been in those cases, should they have had it. But without naming names, I want to turn to both of you about sharing a story where you saw, firsthand how the family map revealed something unexpected. Maybe it was a blind spot, maybe it was a forgotten account, or even some of the misalignment that we've been talking about. So Reza, why don't we start with you? I know we've seen some success within SteelPeak initially with this solution, and there's a lot of interest, and people are, we're talking to a lot of our clients about implementing this solution for them and how they can leverage it. But give us some early success stories. I know it's still early, but maybe give us some early success stories that you've experienced firsthand.
Sure. I'd say that probably one example that really stands out involved a family that we've been working with for years, in fact, actually decades. They've had multiple trusts set up in different states, some dating back a few decades, several family members involved across generations. And when we built this family map, immediately became clear that one of the trusts hadn't been updated to reflect their current goals or family structure. And of course, everyone had assumed it was handled, but in reality, it was operating under outdated terms that could have caused some real issues, further down the road. It's that single discovery that led to a series of important conversations, not just with attorneys and accountants. Of course, that's important as well, but really among family members. It sparked alignment, right? I mean, they clarified their intent, updated their documents, and then after that, created a framework that now reflects their actual wishes. So again, even that one discovery opened up a conversation for us to fix what we feel had a lot of cracks in it. And it's moments like that, which is why we love using the family map. It's again, not just about finding inefficiencies, but it's about uncovering these unknowns before they become actual real problems. And it gives families peace of mind that everything is in sync and that their legacy is being intentionally protected.
Yeah, that makes sense. Josh, how about you?
I could give you a lot of different stories, so I'm gonna try to keep this concise. But I think it's important to say, first of all, that because the stories all will fit in these different buckets,
Mhm.
Leaf Planner and the SteelPeak Family Map are really designed around these pillars that I would say are kind of family education, engagement, empowerment, blind spot identification, which obviously Tyler, you made a reference to, actionalizing task management and life management, and then obviously transition and succession. And we've seen story after story of missed opportunities or new opportunities that have availed themselves because of use of Leaf Planner and the family map, as I was just describing. We've seen families who, again, for some of the audience who may or may not be familiar with these things, but if you have trust structures that require crummy letters, you'd be stunned at how many people have never done their crummy letters, right? I mean, the attorneys are great at sending an administrative memo to say, don't forget, you've got to do a crummy letter once a year. You've got to make 5 GRAT payments to make that grantor retained annuity trust work properly. And then when we go to implement that within a leaf plan and realize nobody's ever done the crummy letters. We actually had a family that had a 5-year GRAT. They had not made a single of the 5-year payments under the GRAT. So they completely blew the benefit of the GRAT, right? So you've got all that kind of actionalization, if you will, and stories that we've seen. We had a client whose daughter was running through O'Hare Airport and lost her phone and was of the generation that keeps the credit card sleeve on the back of the phone, and there goes her credit card, her driver's license, everything else. She couldn't get through TSA. So something as simple as having instant access wherever you are in the world to all this stuff. We've had family office executives use this as a transition tool between a retiring executive and an incoming executive. We've discovered uninsured cars where somebody goes and gets a new car, and if you can't tie the insurance policy to the car, is that because we forgot to tell the insurance agent that we have a new car, right? And we've seen that happen. We've seen people just, their eyes open when they say, I've been a real estate investor my whole life, and nobody's ever asked me the very simple question, what should my kids know about each of these investments? And we had an instance like that where one of our clients said, oh, that partnership that owns raw land in downtown Los Angeles, the kids should hang on to that. That's all we needed to know, right? That was that little piece of context that again became clear. In my own life, my wife and I belong to a super high-end vacation club, one that you guys are certainly familiar with. And when I went to put it in my leaf plan and I read my contract, it turned out that my contract is inheritable by my kids as long as I let the club know within 90 days that I'm dead. So I was like, oh, well, that's a pretty important thing. I hope my kids are crying for 90 days, not necessarily thinking about their next vacation. And so, in my leaf plan is a note to say, hey, if something happens to me, make sure that within the first 90 days, you make this phone call. That's an expensive phone call to miss. And then even on the advisor and client side, in the SteelPeak instance, we're seeing a real deepening of client relationships. And that's really, really important to us to see the advisor be able to deepen that client relationship, to really think about that multi-generational nature of the relationship. And also, of course, client retention, which is always important. So many different instances where we're seeing the value proposition or the blind spot, as you described it, Tyler, come from this.
There's a stat that I think many of us are familiar with in the industry, which is 70% or more of wealth transfers fail by the second generation. And I want to go back to you, Reza, because you were touching on the experiences that you've seen firsthand. And they're kind of around the human side of wealth, right? They're less about, what's the asset mark to market today? How much could it be sold for? what's the inheritable value, what's the taxable value. Obviously, those things are really important and that helps structure it. But you kind of get to this notion of like, okay, why was this given to this person as part of, a will, or what was the intention behind acquiring this asset, back 20 years ago when we did. Can you share a little bit more about some of that human side? How does this help advisors really navigate the human side? What are the connections that they're making with, what is the firm, what's SteelPeak specifically, the connection that SteelPeak is making with clients that goes much deeper than just, asset values and, taxable estates?
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, it's often a very powerful and emotional experience, right? I mean, many of our clients have spent decades building their wealth, managing businesses, creating trusts, and coordinating with professionals, but they've never actually seen it all laid out in one place. So, for us, what we've seen is when we present the holistic family map, there's often this moment of pause. And you can literally see the relief set in because what was once fragmented or scattered across files and advisors suddenly becomes tangible and understandable. And then ultimately, what I've found in my own personal experience of sitting with clients in these meetings and going through this process is that it has replaced anxiety with confidence. And we've had clients say, literally, quote, for the first time, I can actually see how everything connects. And that moment changes their relationship with their wealth. And it's no longer abstract. They feel more in control, more prepared, and I would say more at peace, knowing that their family has a clear, again, roadmap. I would say it's one of probably the most rewarding parts of what we do at a firm like SteelPeak Wealth, because it goes above and beyond investment management and even financial planning. But again, it brings the entire holistic picture in play.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so we touched on the human side, we touched on the organizational side. I would be remiss in not unpacking a little bit more about the tech side and kind of the future of what this looks like. This is a time period in history where we have 5 functioning generations, meaning they're all sort of contributing to the workforce or contributing to, a family's wealth in many regards. Now, it's debatable whether the early generation is contributing as much as the older generation, and that's a debate for a different time. But looking ahead, we know that technology is reshaping every aspect of wealth management. And at the core, there is some really interesting technology built into leafplanner. And I'm sure you're thinking, Josh, about how, to evolve this going forward. What specifically are you looking at as you're thinking of kind of how the next generations will engage differently with their legacy, specifically around technology?
So I think unpacking a few things that you touched on there, I think are really important. So one is that the wealth landscape and the wealth advisory landscape, I think, is shifting under our feet. Now it does generation to generation anyway. But if you look back, even my parents' generation, certainly their parents' generation, there was a much greater attitude about everybody can find out when I'm dead, whatever is there. There's obviously been a great shift over the last 30, 40, even 50 years toward more transparency, more education. And we've got this huge shift to many more families that are facing multi-generational wealth. And that's a huge issue, which goes back even, Tyler, to your comment about the 70% statistic and how do we share information better. And one of the things I like to jokingly say is you don't end up as a family on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal because you were fighting over 10 more basis points of performance. You typically end up there because sister and brother are suing each other because nobody knows why mom and dad did this, that, or the other. So I think there's this trend toward transparency. There's this trend toward education. Family offices are looking more and more at having a chief learning officer, whether on a fractional basis or a full-time basis. And so how do you think about delivering all that? And that's going to be done through technology. And I would say leafplanner is, kind of at the forefront of that. For example, the use of AI, although AI will come into where leafplanner is heading, but it's at the forefront of thinking about what's the technology solution to meet where the wealth management industry is going. And so I think that's one way we look at it. Again, how does that therefore create more visualization? How do you think about different learning styles? It used to be that here's the balance sheet. Either you know how to read it or you don't. Well, we want to think about different learning styles and making sure that people can visualize. As Reza even said, you've got very sophisticated, very wealthy people who maybe are now seeing their family map for the first time. Now they're seeing the legacy. Now they're seeing the purpose. Now they're seeing the values that are behind it. And so we want to do that within, I think we do that very successfully within Leaf Planner. So I think you're going to see a continuing trend toward different ways of educating and presenting information. I think you're going to see more and more need for collaboration among different tools and integration among those tools. And again, we're at the Leaf Planner side working really as fast as we can and hard at those kind of integrations. You can't have a conversation without talking about AI. At the Leaf Planner level, for example, we're in the initial building and testing of an AI agent that would allow you to actually communicate with your Leaf Plan, or in your guys' case, communicate with your family map and ask those questions so that rising gen who's trying to get an answer, first of all, doesn't have to pick up the phone at $1,500 an hour to call the estate lawyer, but can also have an interactive conversation. And I think that's only going to get more exciting. I mean, we're talking to companies that it's very early stages, I suspect, but how could you, within a Leaf Plan, for example, or a SteelPeak family map, have enough data around what grandma and grandpa thought and why they did things to actually have a holographic conversation with your ancestors? Like, how cool will that be as this continues to develop? And the more we get into that, this isn't just about the balance sheet and the numbers and the documents, it's about the values and the human side, as you said, the more those different technologies are going to coalesce to provide that in a really fascinating way.
Yeah, and that's hopefully a major takeaway for those that are listening and following along is, just that. The technology is important. The technology will evolve, but at the core, you're really building relationships and you're facilitating communications that otherwise weren't being had. And gosh, the future is really exciting to think about, holographic communication with ancestors. That's some space age stuff. That's cool. So Reza, I want to give you last word here. So as you think about SteelPeak's future and specifically this partnership, how does this partnership position us among some of the future forward firms serving these complex families?
Yeah, I think, look, the best advice I can give for anyone that's looking at this holistic family map is, first of all, to start the conversation, right? But going back to the conversation around multi-gen planning, where do we see this thing going? I look at this next generation, how they view money and legacy through a completely different lens. They value transparency, collaboration, and technology that feels more intuitive and connected. They want to engage with their wealth in real time, not through static reports once a year. So what we see is like the future of multi-generational planning as being highly interactive and driven by data visualization, secure collaboration tools, and even to what Josh is saying, right? I mean, AI insights that can help families make faster, smarter decisions, which I know it's coming. But even with all that technology, human guidance still remains at the center of it, in our opinion. And that's one of the things that when you look at firm like SteelPeak, we've built this ecosystem designed to bridge that gap where you've got, combining these advisor-led relationships with cutting edge, state-of-the-art tools like Leaf Planner. That's the marriage that we're looking for. And therefore, our advisors aren't just managing investments anymore. They're essentially helping families design, monitor, and evolve the architecture of their entire legacy. So because of that, at the end of the day, what I say now is that we don't just manage assets, right? We manage the architecture of a family's legacy, and that's where true lasting value is created.
That's great. Well, this has been such a valuable discussion, and I think what stands out is how universal this challenge is, yet there are solutions like the Holistic Family Map powered by Leaf Planner to help solve this really daunting endeavor. So whether you're a first generation entrepreneur or a fifth generation legacy minded steward of the family's wealth, clarity really does become everything. And in my opinion, the key takeaway here is before you do anything, begin the conversation. Start with a conversation about the assets that you have and the wealth that your family has created to make sure that you have a family map and it's complete and thorough. So for anyone that's interested in learning how SteelPeak can help you build your holistic family map, reach out to us. or you can visit our website at steelpeak.com/family office services just to start the conversation. It's a great place to start. So Josh and Reza, thank you both for being here. But most importantly, thank you for helping lead families toward more intentional legacies and creating this lasting sense of their family wealth.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you.